Welcome again to Faith Fellowship Baptist Church in Brandon, Manitoba. Today in our devotionals in the book of Psalms, we're in Psalm 13, David's feeling abandoned by God. Now in Psalm 12, David felt all alone in that psalm in his position as king. He sensed that all the good and faithful people had left him. He felt abandoned in his position as king. Well, in Psalm 13, David is even more personal, and he feels abandoned personally by God. Listen as I read Psalm 13. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Lest my enemies say, I have prevailed over him. Lest my foes rejoice, because I am shaken. But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation, and I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. Well, being left alone by God was something I think Jonah initially thought would be a good idea. But after being cast into the sea and swallowed by a great fish, as someone wrote, he had a chance to rethink his theology. And in Jonah chapter 2, he finally sensed within himself that to be abandoned by God was not a good thing. And he compared his abandonment to being in hell. He cried out to the Lord to save him. Well, feeling abandoned by God or feeling all alone in this world is more common than it first appears, probably. Many people sense that they've been abandoned by people, by others that they trust in, but then they feel that if no one cares for them, that must include God. He doesn't care either. They reason that this can be very frustrating because Christians are told oftentimes that we're not to feel that way. We shouldn't get depressed. We shouldn't be discouraged. We don't experience such things unless we've done something really bad, unless the sin that we've done is terrible, maybe even unforgivable. Instead, we're supposed to live a victorious life. So it's comforting to know that when somebody who is after God's own heart, like David, felt discouraged and felt depressed, even to the point of abandonment by God, it's good for us to read the psalm like this and to learn the lessons that David gives to us. In stanza 1 of 3, and this psalm is 6 verses, easily divided into 2 verses per stanza, David pleads with God because he senses he's been abandoned. And he asks 4 questions in succession. He says, Lord, will you forget me forever? David's not admitting that God might have a memory loss. He just recognizes that when God forgets someone in Scripture, it means that God is not coming to their aid. God's not providing the help that David knows he's more than qualified to give him. He says, secondly, how long, O Lord, will you hide your face from me? Hiding the face signifies withholding favor. In Numbers chapter 6, verse 25, the face of God shining upon you is a way that God has of saying that I am favorable towards you and I will bless you. David says, I don't feel your blessings in my life. In our family relationships, we might recognize that in the early days of marriage, there was joy and happiness of just being together. But now it's replaced by the stress of just trying to stay together. We wonder, has God forgotten us? Have the blessings we once enjoyed been lost forever? In our workplace, the early days on the job, we made good progress. We enjoyed the place and the people and the responsibilities of the work, but we've been there for some time now. And it's become a drudgery and it's become a chore. Has God forgotten where you work? Will it be like this forever? Will I have no joy in what I do? It happens in our own spiritual life, in our personal life. It may have been years and years that you were committed to the Lord's service and you were involved in service and you saw many answers to prayer and many blessings. But now you might start to sense that there's a lack of blessing and you don't see God actively working in your life the same way. And you wonder if it's going to be this way forever. David's third question about how long, he says, how long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? This is his question of no longer sensing that God is blessing, and instead he starts to reflect back on past failures, perhaps. His emotions get into a tailspin, and David starts talking to himself. He takes counsel in his own soul. He's having trouble thinking straight, but not having any trouble imagining the worst things. In a period of waiting for God to act, sometimes we get busy, as David was here in this question, of trying to come up with his own solution, to come up with a way to deliver himself, to find out his own salvation out of this situation. And do you know that And I'm sure you know, those of us who have been in times of abandonment, that nighttime, lying on our bed is perhaps the worst time of the day. We lie in bed and our minds work away on plans and ideas, and sometimes they keep us up all night, and then we wake up and recognize, as David said in verse 2, I still have sorrow all day in my heart. My plans don't work. I've been thinking about them all night, but I wake up in the morning and I'm carrying that discouragement and disappointment with me through the day. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and have sorrow in my heart? And then fourthly, he says, how long will my enemy triumph over me? How long will this person or this situation or this group of people get the upper hand on me? This is not how I want to live, David says. This is not how I'm supposed to live. And as a Christian, we would say, I have been saved for something better than this. The enemies of God are clearly the enemies of David. And when the enemies of God begin to rise and to seek dominion over the Lord and over his people, it's a good time for God's people to pray. So in the second stanza, that's just what David does. He pauses from his discouragement and his questioning, and he begins now to pray with God. No matter how depressed or discouraged or feeling abandoned we get as believers, there's always a sense of God's presence and hope for the true child of God. How long was it before David started to pray? We're not told. How long did David endure this personal loss and time of discouragement or depression or feelings of abandonment? We don't know. But we do know he started to pray. And his prayer was simple. It was 3 simple requests. He says, Lord, look at me. There's that sense that God had looked away, and David is simply saying, turn around. It's like you're dealing with a child sometimes, and you say, look me in the eyes, look me in the face. God, I need your attention. I am your child. I need you to hear me. David says, secondly, Lord, answer me. He says, I need to hear from you. If this is going to come to an end, if my discouragement is going to be taken over, if I'm going to sense that I'm your child again and get rid of this loss of abandonment, I need to hear from you. And then he says, thirdly, Lord, give light to my eyes. I'm tired. I'm discouraged. I have no energy. I need to be revived. The same word here, give light to my eyes, is what we find in 1 Samuel 14 in the story of Jonathan eating some honey. And it says his eyes brightened because he was physically and emotionally refreshed just from a simple taking of the honey. And David says, I need to have that energy revitalized in my soul. Lord, please give me light for my eyes. I want you to restore me physically, emotionally, spiritually. I need full health and strength again. God, I want to see again. I want to get out of this fog. I want to be able to see you and to experience your hand of blessing and grace in my life. God, I need some hope, and I know now that it will only come, not from my own plans, but from you. And do this, please, before I die, lest I sleep the sleep of death. And do this before my enemies triumph, because that would not be good for your reputation, let alone mine. David was concerned for the Lord's reputation. And then the third stanza in verses 5 and 6, he goes from a pleading to God to praying with God to a praise of God. And the psalm ends in hope. His recovery is in motion. The final 2 verses have a completely different tone from the rest of the psalm. And up to this point, David's been a little bit anxious. He's feeling disturbed. He's abandoned by God. But now his trust in the Lord has been restored. He's looked up again and seen the hope that is found in the Lord. Verse 5 says, but as for me, I have trusted in you. He's no longer concerned about his situation. He's no longer concerned about his enemies. His focus has shifted, trusting in the Lord's steadfast love. Well, we know that we know that David's heart was turned because in verse 6 it says he now has a song. And I think oftentimes as believers, we have a song. The psalmist says he's put a new song in my heart, even praise to our God. And when we lose that song, when we lose that step of joy and excitement in the Lord, and when we feel abandoned, it's time, verses 3 and 4, to get back to pray. And so David does that, and he feels his enthusiasm return. Alan Ross writes, if God gloriously delivers his people, their response should be an enthusiastic one. And that's what's contained in the word there. I'm enthusiastic about what God is doing in my life now. Well, today, if you're suffering from a feeling of abandonment by God, that's what this psalm is all about. No one can tell you or guarantee you when that time of discouragement will be over, or when the abandonment will be over, or how God will move in your heart. But we can know from this psalm that he will. that he will lift the fog. He will lift the curtain of discouragement, and you will be back into fellowship with him. But sometimes the hardest thing is to wait for the Lord to do what only God can do. The key in waiting is to keep praying and trusting. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In other words, like David, stop trying to come up with your own plan as to how to fix the problem, but instead trust in his ability to make something happen. And when the curtain does go up, when the fog is lifted and the pain of the abandonment and discouragement disappears, you will know then that God has indeed, as it says in verse 7, dealt bountifully with you, and that he has loved you all the time.